You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. Be sure to smash that like button. Mel Kiper came out with his latest big board. So if you're not familiar, this isn't a mock draft. It's just Mel Kiper ranking the top 25 players in the draft. And then he does his position ranking, so the top 10 players at each position for the upcoming draft. Will Anderson, he has from Alabama as the best player in this upcoming draft. Jalen Carter, the defensive tackle from Georgia, number 2. Quarterbacks, as you'd expect, C.J. Stroud, the third best player. Will Levis from Kentucky, he ranks as the 4th best player in the draft. Some people surprised to see Bryce Young dip a little bit there at 5, but there's no real argument there. I mean, all really good players and all who are going to be highly drafted. Kiper did list, however, a few players that dropped out of his initial rankings since the season started, his initial big board. The prospects who have dropped out since September, among them are wide receiver Kayshon Boutte from LSU, Anthony Richardson from Florida, Keely Ringo from Georgia, Tyler Van Dyke, the quarterback from Miami. So Kayshon was a top 25 overall prospect, according to Kiper, before the season started, and has dropped out of that list, but he certainly can work his way back, and I suspect he will. He'll be a first-round pick. What was more interesting to me, because I think we all know who the best players in the draft are going to be, what was more interesting to me was when I was going through the position rankings. And what is kind of starting to crystallize is LSU has a possibility of doing something really special next year if a lot of their players decide to return. Now, that may seem like an obvious statement, but in a given year, usually you'll have guys that are no-brainers that are going to leave early and guys that have no business leaving early. And then you usually have a few on the fence that you're waiting on a decision. By my count, LSU has at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, at least 7 guys, at least 7, who are likely draft prospects who would stand to benefit by returning for another year if they chose to do so. And if they all return, LSU next year could be one of the most veteran and most talented teams in the country, because you would have this blend of experience, not only college football experience, but experience with Brian Kelly. And then you've supplemented with this tremendous recruiting class and back-to-back recruiting classes and all this young talent. And then you can go supplement in the transfer portal instead of building your whole roster, essentially, around the transfer portal. Mel Kiper has Jaden Daniels as the 9th best quarterback in this year's draft. So that's the biggest question that I think everybody asks is, does Jaden Daniels come back for another year? And I've told you what I've heard all along, which is he was always expected to be 3 and to the league. COVID sort of disrupted that, transferred, played at LSU, started slow, but he has really picked up, obviously. If you're wondering, the 9th quarterback taken last year in the draft was Brock Purdy, and he went in the 7th round to San Francisco. So if that holds, essentially what you're saying is Jaden Daniels is a day 3 guy. Now, what does he do over the next month? How much could he elevate his draft stock? That remains to be seen. But if you get Jaden Daniels back, that's obviously a no-brainer. Mel Kiper has none of the running backs listed among his top 10, and he also lists another handful of guys that just missed the cut. And so I understand John Emery's career hasn't gone the way that a lot of people had hoped, but Emery would probably stand to come back for another year. He's fresh. Armani Goodwin should be back. You're adding 2 dynamic freshmen as well that are going to be coming in. So your running back room is going to be far deeper than it is right now. No fullbacks. Kayshon, he lists as the 5th best receiver in this upcoming draft. No tight ends, which means you could return your entire tight end room. Certainly will return Mason Taylor. No offensive lineman on Kiper's big board. As we mentioned, you're going to return your entire starting 5. and a lot of depth behind him. The only other spots where LSU has a player that Kiper lists among the top 10 is at outside linebacker, where he lists B.J. Ojulari as the 6th best outside linebacker for this upcoming draft. I think we all understand B.J. is going to go to the league. He's going to go to the combine, wow everybody, and I think be a first-round draft pick because edge rushers are so valuable. And when you produce the way that B.J. has over 3 years at a place like LSU, it's a no-brainer. He's going to go pro, and he's going to be highly drafted, and you'll have to replace B.J. Ojulari. But this is where one of the ones that's kind of like iffy. I've always just operated under the assumption that Jaquelin Roy was going to go pro after this year. Mel Kiper does not have Jaquelin Roy among his top 10. He's got his top 10, and then after that, he's got a list of those guys that just missed the cut, and that's where you find Jaquelin Roy. After Fabian Lovett, Calijay Cansey of Pitt, Darius Robinson of Missouri, and then Jaquelin Roy. So basically, he's got Roy as the 14th best defensive tackle in this year's draft, which may make him a day 3 pick. So, that's where it really starts to get interesting for Brian Kelly in this team. And I'll remind you the last time this happened for LSU. Now, it did happen a year ago, before the 2021 season. Ed got a lot of guys to come back, like Deculus and Hines and Ed Ingram and Neil Farrell and Glenn Logan. You had a lot of guys return who ended up being draft picks. Why LSU had 10 guys drafted last year. They had talent, they had veterans, they just were poorly coached and they lost a bunch of games. But it was after the 2015 season. That season started off so great, then LSU, of course, got stonewalled in Tuscaloosa, and they unraveled late. They were embarrassed in the all-white uniforms in Oxford, and then they lost. They got blown out by Arkansas as well in Baton Rouge. But all of those guys came back for 2016. The whole team came back for 2016. It was incredible. You had Tre'Davious White return and Kendall Beckwith and Ethan Posick, and you had such a veteran team. And you went into 2016 preseason top 5. You're the number 3. I think you're the number 3 team in the country when you lost to Wisconsin at Lambeau. But that team was one of the most talented teams in the country. And when I look at this, you know you're going to lose Kayshon Boutte, and you know you're going to lose B.J. Ojulari. Ali Gay is out of eligibility. Jure Jenkins is out of eligibility. So, some of these guys, Micah Baskerville's out of eligibility. Some of these guys are going to go, and they're going to be drafted. Like I just mentioned 5 guys to you right there that won't be back and are going to be drafted. Everyone else has a really interesting decision to make. And I could make a strong case that all of these guys should return. John Emery, Jaden Daniels, Mike Jones. Now, Jark Bernard-Converse, he's a senior. He's out of eligibility. But Jay Ward's a junior. Should Jay Ward return for another year? You don't think he would stand to benefit to come back, play on a winning team, be one of the best defensive backs on an improved team, and go maybe be a top 100 draft pick? You got veteran guys like Fouché and Brooks who will be gone, but what about Major Burns? He's been injured the past couple of years. Does he return? I mean, you could start to look at it and say, this goes one of 2 ways. Either all of these guys leave and LSU ends up having, again, a double-digit number of guys drafted because you had so many veterans that were transfers. But if a lot of these underclassmen and guys with an extra year because of COVID make the decision to return, LSU could be, next year, a preseason top 10 team, one of the most talented teams in the country, and a team with a realistic championship expectation. Now, we're not going to resolve this today. There's a long way to go between now and guys making draft decisions. But it just occurred to me today when I was reading through Kiper's big board today and his position rankings, there aren't a lot of no-brainers for guys that are going to leave. And for a lot of these guys, most of these guys, I would make the strong recommendation that they return to improve their draft stock enough to where it would be beneficial if you're going to be a late, day 3 pick or potentially play your way into a top 100 pick, which is the reality for a lot of these guys, which makes this a really interesting conversation. So file that away. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.